The morning California sun beat down on the Coronado training facility as I stepped onto the shooting range, my boots crunching against the gravel. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and ocean salt. Around me, dozens of broad-shouldered men in camouflage uniforms leaned casually against ammunition crates, checking scopes, adjusting gear. They were all SEALs. Elite, proven, respected, and then there was me. I heard the voice before I saw him, that familiar, commanding tone that had shaped my childhood and haunted my dreams. "You don't belong on this SEAL range." The words cut through the morning air like a blade. I turned slowly, and there he stood. Admiral Marcus Steele. My father, 6'3", steel-gray hair, chest decorated with 30 years of military honors. His eyes, the same piercing blue I saw in the mirror every morning, scanned me with the cold detachment of a commanding officer, evaluating a recruit. Not a hint of recognition, not a flicker of warmth, just professional disdain for someone he believed didn't belong. The other men picked up on his tone. Chuckles rippled through the range like distant thunder. I felt their eyes on me, measuring, dismissing. In their minds, I was just another wannabe, another civilian trying to play soldier. They had no idea who I really was. I didn't say a word. Instead, I walked past their smirks and whispers, past their assumptions and their arrogance. I approached the weapon rack where rows of rifles gleamed under the morning sun. Mang 4s, MK1, 18s, and there, at the end, an old beast of a rifle. My favorite. As I picked it up, the laughter stopped. Just for a moment. What happened next would shatter every record on that range. It would expose secrets that had been buried for years, and it would force my father to confront the daughter he had spent 2 decades pretending didn't exist. My name is Captain Sarah Steele, and this is the story of how I went from being invisible to unforgettable in the span of 5 shots. To understand what happened that day at Coronado, you need to understand how I got there. You need to understand the weight of growing up in the shadow of a legend, the cost of being born the wrong gender into a military dynasty, and the price I paid to prove that blood doesn't determine worth, actions do. I was born into the Steele family legacy. My father, Marcus Steele, was already a decorated Navy officer when I arrived, screaming and defiant on a rainy Tuesday in 19. He was the architect of 3 major military operations, the youngest admiral in Pacific Fleet history, the kind of man other men followed into hell without question. My older brother Jake was the heir apparent to that legacy, golden-haired, broad-shouldered, naturally gifted at everything that mattered in our household: shooting, swimming, tactical thinking, leadership. From the time he could hold a toy gun, Dad groomed him for greatness. Military academy applications were filled out before Jake hit high school. His bedroom was a shrine to naval history, filled with model ships, tactical manuals, and photographs of him shaking hands with admirals and generals. My room was at the end of the hall, quiet, forgotten, no expectation. Mom was the buffer, the gentle force that made our house feel like a home instead of a barracks. She'd brush my hair in the kitchen while Dad drilled Jake on military strategy in the living room. "You're the steady one, sweetheart," she'd whisper, "the strong one. Don't let anyone tell you different." But when I turned 11, Mom got sick. Cancer, aggressive and merciless. Within 8 months, she was gone, and with her went the only person who saw me as more than an afterthought. After the funeral, our house became colder, more regimented. Dad threw himself into work, and Jake's training with the intensity of a man trying to outrun grief. Dinner conversations became tactical briefings. Family time became strategy sessions. I learned to eat in silence, study alone, and train in secret. While Jake was praised for every average test score, I aced my exams and tucked the papers away in desk drawers. When he got participation ribbons for youth sports, they went on the refrigerator. When I won first place in the district track meet, no one came to watch. I stopped hoping for applause. I started waking up at 5 a.m. to run before anyone was awake. I taught myself to shoot with a pellet gun in the woods behind our house, using soda cans and pine cones as targets. I devoured Dad's old training manuals, memorizing drills I wasn't allowed to learn. By 16, I could outrun Jake. By 17, I could outshoot him. But in Dad's eyes, I was still invisible. The breaking point came during Jake's senior year. He was applying to the Naval Academy, his third attempt. The first two rejections had been devastating. But Dad kept pushing, kept believing, kept telling Jake it was just politics, that they'd recognize his potential eventually. I applied to West Point on my own. No fanfare, no family meetings, no recommendations from Dad. I didn't even tell them I was applying. I just did it, quietly, like everything else in my life. I got in, full merit scholarship. Top percentile scores. I left the acceptance letter on the kitchen table one morning before school. When I came home, it was gone. Dad had moved it aside like junk mail. Jake hadn't even noticed. There was no congratulations, no celebration, no acknowledgement that their daughter and sister had just achieved something remarkable. So I packed my bags in silence. I hugged no one goodbye. No one saw me to the door, but as I stepped onto that bus heading to West Point, I made a vow that would shape the next decade of my life. If they wouldn't see me now, they'd damn well see me later. West Point was supposed to be my fresh start, my chance to prove myself without the weight of family expectations, or the shadow of my father's reputation. I was wrong. The moment I stepped onto campus, I realized that being Admiral Steele's daughter came with its own set of challenges. Some cadets thought doors should open for me, automatically. Others assumed I didn't deserve to be there at all. I wanted neither advantage nor prejudice, so I made a decision that would define my entire military career. I requested to be listed in all records as Steele. No first name, just an initial. Sarah could carry the assumptions and expectations. Steele could prove herself on merit alone. The strategy worked better than I'd hoped. My instructors and fellow cadets knew me only as Steele. Competent, reliable, unremarkable in the way that gets things done without drawing attention. I excelled in land navigation, close quarters combat, and precision marksmanship. My scores were consistently in the top 5%, but I never made a show of it. 4 years later, I graduated with honors and a commission as a second lieutenant. Dad didn't attend the ceremony. He was deployed according to the formal regret letter I received. Jake sent a text. "Congrats, sis." That was it. I chose Army intelligence over the more traditional Steele family Navy track. If I was going to forge my own path, it would be completely my own. My first assignment was Fort Bragg, where I quickly distinguished myself in advanced reconnaissance training. That's where I met Captain Rodriguez, a grizzled Special Forces veteran, who would become my first real mentor. He noticed what others missed, that I moved through training exercises like I'd been born for them, that I had an instinct for reading terrain and enemy movements that couldn't be taught. "Steele," he said after watching me navigate a particularly complex night operation, "you've got something special. Question is, what are you going to do with it?" I knew what I wanted to do with it. I wanted to prove that being Admiral Steele's daughter had nothing to do with my capability. I wanted to earn my place in the most elite units the military had to offer, not because of my name, but in spite of it. I applied for special operations. The selection process was brutal. 8 weeks of physical and mental testing, designed to break even the strongest candidate. Of the 200 people who started, only 23 graduated. I was one of them, and one of only 2 women. But even then, even after proving myself alongside the best soldiers in the world, I couldn't escape my father's shadow. A few months into my first deployment, I overheard 2 senior officers talking. "Steele's got potential," one said. "Too bad she's trying so hard to distance herself from her old man. Marcus could open doors for her if she'd let him." "Maybe that's the point," the other replied. "Maybe she knows she can't measure up to the family name." That night, lying in my bunk in a forward operating base in Afghanistan, I made another decision. I would request transfer to the most classified, most dangerous, most elite unit I could find. A unit where my father's influence couldn't reach, where his reputation couldn't help or hurt me. I applied for Delta Force selection. The application alone required security clearances, so deep that most of my military record would be classified or compartmentalized. If I made it in, I wouldn't just be S. Steele anymore. I'd be a ghost, operating under call signs and code names. my real identity buried so deep that even my father wouldn't be able to track my service record. Selection for Delta Force makes regular special operations training look like summer camp. The physical requirements are crushing, but the mental demands are worse. They don't just want to know if you can pull a trigger or carry a wounded teammate. They want to know if you can make life or death decisions under pressure, while maintaining perfect operational security. 97 people started selection. 6 finished. I was one of them. For the first time in my life, I had earned something that had nothing to do with being Admiral Steele's daughter. I had a new identity. Operator 774, call sign Ghost. My real name existed only in classified files that required presidential-level clearance to access. For 5 years, I operated in the shadows. Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Afghanistan, hostage rescue, high-value target elimination, deep reconnaissance. I saved lives, completed impossible missions, and earned the respect of operators who didn't even know my real name. But shadows, I learned, are only comfortable until you remember what sunshine feels like. The mission that changed everything happened in 2019, in the mountains of northern Syria. We were tasked with extracting a high-value intelligence asset from an ISIS stronghold. The operation was supposed to be quick and clean, in and out in under an hour. Everything went wrong. Our intelligence was flawed. Instead of the 5 guards we expected, there were 20. Our extraction helicopter took RPG fire and had to abort. Suddenly, my 6-man team was surrounded, outgunned, and cut off from support. That's when training and instinct merged into something beyond conscious thought. I took command when our team leader went down with a leg wound. I reorganized our position, coordinated suppressing fire, and led a fighting withdrawal through hostile territory that should have been impossible. We covered 12 miles on foot, carrying our wounded through enemy-controlled mountains. I called in precision airstrikes using coordinates I calculated in my head while under fire. When we finally reached the extraction point, all 6 team members were alive. The after-action report was classified at the highest levels, but word spreads in the special operations community. I started hearing whispers about Ghost and the Syria extraction. My reputation was growing, but it was still tied to a call sign, not a name. That's when I got the call that would bring me back into my father's orbit. "Steele, we need you for a special assignment," Colonel Martinez said over the secure line. "The Navy is running joint training operations with our people. They've requested our best instructor for precision marksmanship training. That's you." "Where?" I asked, though something in my gut already knew the answer. "Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. You'll be working with SEAL teams on advanced shooting techniques." My father's base. My father's SEALs. After 7 years of operating in the shadows, fate was about to drag me back into the light. "Sir," I said carefully, "I should mention that Admiral Steele is my father. There might be a conflict of interest." "Not anymore, there isn't," Martinez replied. "Your military record under the name Sarah Steele is classified. As far as anyone at Coronado knows, you're just another special operations instructor named S. Steele. Unless you tell them otherwise, they'll never make the connection." He was right. My Delta Force service had created a new identity that was completely separate from my family history. I could walk onto my father's base, work alongside his people, and he would never know his daughter was there. The irony was perfect. I would finally have the chance to prove myself on my father's turf, under his nose, without the burden of being Admiral Steele's daughter. I accepted the assignment. The morning I arrived at Coronado, I felt like I was stepping into a different universe. The base hummed with the kind of professional intensity I remembered from visiting Dad's work as a child. Crisp uniforms, sharp salutes, the constant backdrop of physical training and tactical preparation. I checked in with base security using my Steele credentials, collected my temporary quarters assignment, and received my briefing materials. According to my orders, I would spend 2 weeks training SEAL teams in advanced marksmanship techniques, with emphasis on precision shooting under stress conditions. What my orders didn't mention was that Admiral Marcus Steele would be personally overseeing the training program. I found that out when I walked into the briefing room for the instructors' meeting, and saw him standing at the front, reviewing training schedules with the other senior officer. 7 years had aged him, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but he still carried himself with the same commanding presence that had dominated my childhood. For a moment, I froze. This was my father 3 feet away, close enough that I could see the small scar on his left hand from the fishing accident when I was 8, close enough that I could smell the same cologne he'd worn my entire life. But when he looked up from his paperwork and his eyes met mine, there was no recognition, none. He saw a special operations instructor named S. Steele. Nothing more. Steele, he said with crisp professionalism, welcome to Coronado. I've reviewed your qualifications. Impressive record. Thank you, sir. You'll be working primarily with Alpha and Bravo platoons. Some of our most experienced operators, but there's always room for improvement. I trust you'll push them appropriately. Yes, sir. That was it. My first conversation with my father in 7 years, and he had no idea who he was talking to. The next morning, I met my students on the shooting range. 24 SEALs, all male, all radiating the kind of confidence that comes from being elite operators. Their instructor introduced me simply as Steele, Special Operations Command, and left it at that. I could see the skepticism in their eyes as they sized me up. I was smaller than most of them, quieter, less imposing. In their world, instructors were usually grizzled veterans with booming voices and larger-than-life personalities. I was none of those things. Ma'am, one of them said, a senior chief with arms like tree trunks, and a Texas drawl. What's your background? Where'd you serve? Classified, I replied simply. Let's focus on why we're here. That answer didn't satisfy them, but it was the only one I could give. My Delta Force service was compartmentalized at levels that made normal military secrecy look casual. These men had security clearances that let them see some of the most sensitive operations in the military, but my record was still beyond their reach. I started with basic marksmanship assessment. Standard distances, standard targets, using the M4 rifles they were familiar with. Most of them shot well, the kind of solid, professional accuracy I expected from SEALs. Then I took my turn. I picked up one of their M4s, a rifle I hadn't fired in months, and put 20 rounds through the same hole at 300 meters, perfect group, dead center. The range went quiet. Your turn, I said, setting the rifle down. But we're going to make it harder. For the next week, I pushed them through shooting scenarios they'd never experienced, moving targets at extreme distances, precision shots while under physical stress, night shooting with minimal illumination, combat reloads under time pressure that would make competition shooters weep. I didn't just teach them techniques, I demonstrated every single one. When I told them to hit a playing card at 500 meters, I did it first. When I explained shooting positions for confined spaces, I showed them by putting rounds exactly where I said they'd go. By the end of the first week, their skepticism had turned to respect. They stopped questioning my background and started paying attention to every word I said. They started calling me the Ghost, not knowing how accurate that nickname really was. But the moment that changed everything happened on Friday afternoon. Admiral Steele, my father, decided to observe the training session. He stood at the back of the range with a small group of senior officers, clipboard in hand, watching his SEALs work through a complex shooting drill I'd designed. The drill was challenging. Shooters had to engage multiple targets at varying distances, while moving through an obstacle course, then finish with a precision shot at an extremely small target, a steel disc about the size of a silver dollar. Most of the SEALs did well on the movement and close-range shooting, but the final precision shot was defeating almost everyone. It required perfect breathing control, flawless trigger technique, and the kind of mental focus that comes only from years of practice. After watching 6 consecutive misses, I heard my father's voice carry across the range. This final shot is too difficult, he told the range master. We're setting these men up for failure. Lower the target or move it closer. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. Sir, I called out loud enough for everyone to hear. The shot is achievable. The target stays where it is. My father turned, his eyes narrowing as he focused on me. Instructor Steele, I appreciate your confidence in these operators, but practical training means practical standards. Then let me demonstrate, sir. I walked to the firing line, picked up an M14 rifle, the same model I'd trained with in those woods behind our house as a teenager, and chambered a round. The range was absolutely silent. 24 SEALs, 5 senior officers, and my father all watching to see if I could back up my words. I settled into my shooting position, controlled my breathing, and found that familiar state of absolute calm that had kept me alive through 5 years of special operations. The target looked impossibly small through the scope, but I'd made harder shots under worse conditions. I squeezed the trigger. The steel disc rang like a bell as the bullet struck dead center. The silence stretched for several seconds before someone whispered, "Holy shit." But I wasn't done. I worked the bolt, chambered another round, and fired again. The second bullet struck so close to the first that the impact marks overlapped. Then a third shot, same result. I set the rifle down and turned to face my father. "The target stays where it is, sir." For the first time since I'd arrived at Coronado, Admiral Marcus Steele was speechless. He stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not recognition, but something close to it. Curiosity mixed with respect. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of understanding that he was looking at someone exceptional. "Outstanding shooting, Steele," he said finally. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" It was the perfect moment. The opening I'd waited 7 years for. I could have told him the truth right then, that I'd learned to shoot in the woods behind the house where he'd raised me. That I was the daughter he'd ignored, the child he'd overlooked, the soldier he'd never seen coming. Instead I said, "Experience, sir." But something had shifted. I could see it in the way he looked at me, the way the other officers whispered among themselves, the way the SEALs regarded me with new respect. They still didn't know who I was. But for the first time in my life, my father was paying attention to something I'd done. Not because of my name, not because of family obligation, but because I'd earned it. The second week of training was different. Word had spread through the base about the mystery instructor, who could outshoot anyone they'd ever seen. Officers started finding excuses to observe my session. My students hung on every word, eager to learn from someone who had clearly mastered skills they were still developing. And my father, Admiral Steele, began showing up to more training sessions. He never said much, just observed and took notes, but I could feel his attention like a weight on my shoulders. On Thursday of the second week, he approached me after a particularly challenging session that had involved shooting while rappelling from a tower. "Steele," he said, "I've been reviewing your performance reports. Your student scores have improved by an average of 30% in 2 weeks. That's unprecedented. They're good students, sir. They just needed to be challenged appropriately. Where are you headed after this assignment?" I had to be careful here. My next deployment was classified, and I couldn't reveal details without compromising operational security. "Wherever the Army sends me, sir." He nodded slowly. "I'm going to make some calls. The Navy needs instructors like you. I'd like to see if we can arrange a permanent transfer." My father wanted me to transfer to the Navy. He wanted to keep me at Coronado working for him, training his people. He had no idea he was offering his own daughter a job. "I appreciate that, sir. But I'm committed to my current unit." "Think about it," he said. "The offer stands." That night, lying in my temporary quarters, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what was happening. For the first time in my life, my father was impressed by something I'd done. He was offering me a place in his world, a chance to be part of the legacy I'd always been excluded from. But he was offering it to S. Steele, the mysterious special operations instructor, not to Sarah Steele, his daughter. The irony was almost too much to bear. I had finally earned his respect, but only by hiding who I really was. Friday was my last day at Coronado. My orders were to report back to Fort Bragg on Monday for reassignment. As I packed my gear and prepared to leave, I realized I was facing a choice that would define the rest of my relationship with my father. I could leave quietly, the same way I'd arrived, keep my identity secret, my service record classified, my achievements hidden. Steele would fade back into the shadows, and Admiral Steele would never know he'd been working with his daughter, or I could tell him the truth. The final training session was supposed to be a culmination exercise, a complex scenario that would test everything the SEALs had learned over the past 2 weeks. But as I looked out at the assembled operators, at the senior officers observing from the sidelines, at my father standing with his clipboard, and his air of professional satisfaction, I knew this was going to be something different. This was going to be my moment of truth. "Gentlemen," I announced to the class, "today's exercise will be different. Instead of a team scenario, we're going to have a competition, individual precision shooting, multiple stages, with the top performer earning the right to challenge the instructor." I saw eyebrows raise around the range. Challenging the instructor wasn't part of the normal curriculum, but these were SEALs, competition was in their DNA. "What are the stakes?" asked Senior Chief Rodriguez, the Texan who'd questioned my background on the first day. I looked directly at my father when I answered. "If someone beats me, I'll tell you all something about my background that might surprise you." The competition was intense. 24 of the Navy's finest operators pushing themselves to their absolute limits, trying to earn the right to go head-to-head with the instructor who had already become legendary in their minds. Rodriguez won, barely, and only because 2 other shooters had equipment malfunctions, but he'd earned his shot at the title. "Your challenge, Senior Chief," I said. 5 rounds, 500 meters, smallest group wins." We walked to the firing line together. The entire range had gone quiet. Not just my students, but every person on the base who could find an excuse to be there. Word had spread that something special was happening, and the crowd included officers, enlisted personnel, and civilian contractors. My father stood at the front of the group, close enough that I could see the intensity in his eyes. He was invested in this outcome in a way that surprised me. This wasn't just professional interest, this was personal. Rodriguez shot for 5 rounds in a group the size of a quarter at 500 meters. Exceptional shooting by any standard. Then it was my turn. I picked up the M14, the same rifle I'd used for my demonstration earlier in the week. As I settled into position, I thought about all the hours I'd spent in those woods behind our house, teaching myself to shoot because I wanted to be like my father. I thought about the years of training, the deployments, the missions where precision shooting had meant the difference between life and death. But mostly I thought about the little girl who had desperately wanted her father to notice her, to see her as something more than an afterthought. I fired 5 rounds in rapid succession. Through the spotting scope, I could see that all 5 bullets had struck within a group smaller than a dime. It was some of the best shooting I'd ever done. The range erupted in cheers and applause. Rodriguez walked over and shook my hand with genuine respect. "Ma'am, that was incredible. I've never seen shooting like that." "You earned the right to know more about my background," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Are you ready for that story?" "Yes." I walked to the center of the range, where everyone could see me clearly. My father was standing directly in front of me, maybe 20 feet away. His eyes were focused and attentive, waiting to hear the story that would explain the mystery instructor who had impressed his people so thoroughly. 28 years ago, I began. A little girl was born to a Navy family. Her father was a dedicated officer who believed in service, honor, and excellence. Her mother was the heart of their home. Her older brother was everything their father hoped for in a son. Strong, confident, destined for military greatness. I could see confusion starting to creep into my father's expression. This wasn't the kind of background story he'd been expecting. The little girl wanted desperately to be part of that legacy. She tried to get her father's attention by excelling at everything she could: academics, athletics, anything that might make him proud. But he only had eyes for his son, his heir, the child who would carry on the family tradition. My father's face had gone pale. Some part of him was beginning to understand where this was going, but he couldn't quite believe it yet. When the girl's mother died, she lost the only person who had ever really seen her. She learned to train alone, study alone, succeed alone. She excelled at everything she touched, but there was never anyone watching, never anyone cheering. The crowd was completely silent now. They could sense the emotional weight of what they were hearing, even if they didn't understand the full context yet. She went to West Point, graduated with honors, joined special operations, earned her way into the most elite units in the military. She saved lives, completed impossible missions, and earned the respect of operators who didn't even know her real name. I paused, looking directly at my father. His clipboard had fallen from his hands. His face was a mask of shock and dawning recognition. For 7 years, she served in the shadows, using only an initial and her last name, Steele. The S stood for Sarah. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. I could hear my father's sharp intake of breath, could see the moment when complete understanding hit him like a physical blow. Sarah Steele, I continued, my voice steady and clear. Daughter of Admiral Marcus Steele. The invisible child who became the ghost operator. The little girl who learned to shoot in the woods behind your house. Because she wanted to be like her father. My father's legs seemed to give out slightly. He took a step backward, his hand reaching for something to steady himself against. I am that little girl, Dad. I'm your daughter, and this is the first time in my life that you've ever been proud of something I've done. The silence that followed was absolute. 24 SEALs, a dozen senior officers, and numerous other personnel stood frozen, watching a family drama unfold in the middle of a military training exercise. My father stared at me for what felt like an eternity. I could see him processing everything. The shooting skills I'd learned in secret. The military career he'd never known about. The daughter he'd overlooked, standing in front of him as one of the most elite operators in the military. Finally he spoke. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Sarah? Yes, Dad. It's me. He took a tentative step forward, then another. When he was close enough to touch, he stopped, and really looked at me for what felt like the first time in my life. You're S. Steele, the instructor everyone's been talking about. The one who's been training your people for 2 weeks while you had no idea you were working with your own daughter. His hand came up toward my face, then stopped midway, as if he was afraid I might disappear if he touched me. My God, Sarah, what have I done? What have we done? The crowd around us began to shift and murmur, but I only had eyes for my father. This was the moment I'd been working toward for 7 years. Maybe my whole life. You raised me to be a warrior, Dad. Just not the way you intended. That's when he did something I'd never seen Admiral Marcus Steele do in public. He cried. Not sobbing, not breaking down, but tears ran down his face as he finally truly saw his daughter for who she had become. I'm so proud of you, he whispered. I'm so sorry, and I'm so proud of you. He pulled me into a hug that felt like it contained 28 years of missed connections, lost opportunities, and finally, recognition. The applause that followed started slowly, with one person clapping, then another, until the entire range was thundering with approval. But I barely heard it. All I could focus on was my father's voice in my ear, saying the words I'd waited my entire life to hear. I see you now, Sarah. I see you. That day at Coronado changed everything between my father and me, but it didn't erase the years of feeling invisible or the path I'd taken to prove myself. What it did was teach me something profound about the nature of recognition, worth, and the complicated relationship between seeking approval and finding your own strength. In the weeks that followed my revelation, my father tried to make up for lost time. He called me regularly, asked about my career, expressed interest in my life in ways he never had before. He told people about his daughter, the special operations officer, with genuine pride. But the most important thing I learned was this. I had already become the person I was meant to be before he ever saw me. His recognition was meaningful, emotionally powerful, and healing in ways I hadn't expected, but it didn't create my worth. It only acknowledged. For 28 years, I had believed that being seen by my father was the ultimate goal, the thing that would finally make me complete. What I discovered was that the strength I'd built in the shadows, the skills I'd developed alone, the person I'd become without his approval, that was already complete. Recognition from others, even from the people whose approval we crave most, is a gift. But it's not the foundation of our worth. Our worth comes from the choices we make when no one is watching, the standards we hold ourselves to when there's no audience, the integrity we maintain when it would be easier to compromise. I spent years trying to prove I belonged in my father's world. What I should have been doing was building my own world, which, as it turned out, I had been doing all along. My story isn't unique in its broad strokes. Many of you watching this have felt overlooked, underestimated, or invisible in your own families, your workplaces, your community. You've worked twice as hard for half the recognition, achieved things that went unnoticed, built strength in silence while others got credit for less. Here's what I want you to understand. Your worth isn't determined by whether others see it. Your value isn't diminished by their blindness. Your achievements don't become less significant because they went unrecognized. The skills you develop in the shadows, the resilience you build when you're underestimated, the strength you find when you're forced to stand alone. These become superpowers when the moment comes to step into the light. My father's recognition was wonderful, healing, and important for our relationship. But I didn't need it to be who I already was. I was already a skilled operator, a proven leader, a worthy person before he ever saw me clearly. You are too. The little girl who taught herself to shoot in the woods behind her house didn't know she was building the foundation for a special operations career. She just knew she wanted to be good at something her father valued. The teenager who studied alone and trained in secret didn't know she was developing the self-reliance that would keep her alive in hostile territory. She just knew she had to push herself because no one else would. Every moment of struggle, every achievement that went unnoticed, every time you had to be your own cheerleader and your own champion, those moments were building something in you that can't be taken away. Recognition is beautiful when it comes, but self-recognition is essential regardless. I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll answer honestly in the comments below. When was the last time someone truly saw you for who you are and what you're capable of? Maybe it was yesterday. Maybe it was years ago. Maybe you're still waiting. If you're still waiting, I want you to know that your waiting doesn't make you less valuable. It doesn't mean you're not worth seeing. It means you're surrounded by people who haven't developed the vision to recognize excellence when it's standing right in front of them. But here's the more important question. When was the last time you truly saw yourself? When did you last acknowledge your own growth, your own achievements, your own strength? When did you last give yourself credit for how far you've come, how much you've endured, how much you've accomplished without fanfare or recognition? That recognition, the recognition you give yourself, is the only one you actually control. It's the only one that's guaranteed to be honest, accurate, and available whenever you need it. I've shared my story with you today, not because I think my journey is more important than yours, but because I believe our struggles connect us. Specifics are different. Not everyone grows up in a military family. Not everyone becomes a special operations officer. Not everyone has a dramatic revelation on a shooting range. But all of us know what it feels like to be underestimated. All of us have felt invisible at times. All of us have had to prove ourselves to people who should have seen our worth from the beginning. If this story resonated with something in your own experience, I'd love to hear about it. Tell me in the comments about a time when you proved someone wrong, when you surprised yourself with your own capabilities, when you found strength you didn't know you had. And if you're currently in that place where you're building strength in the shadows, where you're developing skills that no one sees, where you're becoming someone powerful while the world overlooks you, know that your time is coming. The shooting range moment comes for all of us eventually. Maybe not literally, but the moment when your hidden strengths become undeniable, when your quiet achievements demand attention, when the person you've been building in private steps into the light. Be ready for that moment, not because you need other people's validation, but because the world needs what you've built. Your skills, your perspective, your strength, these things matter, whether anyone else sees them yet or not. Before I go, I want to leave you with a challenge. Find one person in your life who might be feeling invisible right now. Someone whose achievements go unnoticed, whose potential is being overlooked, who's building strength in the shadows, while everyone pays attention to louder, more obvious personalities. See them, really see them. Tell them you notice their efforts, their growth, their worth. Be the recognition they've been waiting for, even if it's just for a moment. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is offer someone else the gift of being truly seen. Thank you for taking this journey with me today. Thank you for listening to my story, for understanding that strength often grows best in silence, and for believing that recognition, when it comes, should be earned through action, not inherited through circumstance. If this story moved you, if it challenged you, or if it reminded you of your own hidden strength, please subscribe to this channel, not just for more stories like this one, but because I believe we're building something important here. A community of people who understand that worth isn't determined by volume, that strength often whispers before it roars, and that the most powerful recognition is the kind we give ourselves. The girl who learned to shoot in the woods behind her father's house is still here, still training, still believing that excellence speaks for itself when given the chance. Your chance is coming. When it arrives, be ready to take the shot. Until next time, this is Sarah Steele, reminding you that you don't need permission to be exceptional. You just need to be ready to prove it when the moment demands it. The range is always open, the rifle is always ready, and you are always enough, whether anyone else sees it or not. Take your shot.